Hello, my name is Betty. I'm a 35-year-old corporate professional, and I've been married to Scott for 4 years. Scott, who is 2 years older than me, works at a company that is affiliated with mine. From the very beginning of our marriage, we have been living with his parents in a dual-family home setup. Scott is the younger of two brothers, with his older brother being named Walter. Before Scott and I got married, Walter lived with their parents as the main residence of the family home. Walter's wife, Judy, is known for her talkative nature and competitive spirit, which often led to clashes with her strong-willed mother-in-law. These constant family disagreements eventually caused Walter and his father to move out of the house. Scott had been living independently ever since he started his career, so we never seriously considered living with his parents after marriage. This made it quite a surprise when, shortly before our wedding, Scott's mom announced that we would be moving in with them. I had assumed that we would continue living in my apartment until we were ready to start a family, since it was more convenient for my work commute. However, it turned out that living together was a non-negotiable tradition in Scott's family. Despite my initial hesitation, we eventually agreed to move in with his parents, figuring that the commute wouldn't change much whether we lived at Scott's apartment or in his parents' home. Additionally, the family home, built by Scott's grandfather, had a main house and a guest house, providing plenty of privacy. However, once we moved in, I quickly began to regret our decision. Not long after we settled into our new living arrangement, Scott's mother, who was in her mid-60s, started complaining of back pain and dizziness. This meant that most of the household chores, from cleaning to laundry and shopping, gradually fell on my shoulders. Balancing these tasks with a full-time job was difficult, and even though Scott and I shared the chores, it was just enough to keep both our lives and his parents' household running smoothly. Then, an unexpected financial burden arose. The guest house, which seemed fine from the outside, turned out to need serious renovations. The bathroom, kitchen, roof, and floors all showed significant wear and tear, far more than just minor repairs. Naturally, Scott and I committed to covering the renovation costs. However, we were caught off guard when my mother-in-law insisted that the main house should be renovated as well, after seeing the improvements made to the guest house. The thought of fixing up both our living space and theirs was overwhelming, especially since we simply couldn't afford to take on everything at once. My mother-in-law questioned why I was working if it wasn't to support the family, saying to Scott, "We blessed you with marriage. You should serve us in return." It became clear that they didn't just want the renovations. They also expected us to provide upscale furniture and modern appliances for the refurbished rooms. They even expected us to cover all household expenses, from groceries to other necessities. As a result, Scott and I found it nearly impossible to save any money. As we approached our third wedding anniversary, another unexpected twist occurred. Walter and Judy suddenly announced that they were moving back in and that we needed to move out. Judy explained that Walter had been laid off, but instead of staying on with his job, he had chosen to leave to help a co-worker with children keep his position. Despite having 2-year-old twins themselves, Walter, with his prestigious university education, was considered more capable of finding new work. Faced with this ultimatum, Scott and I spent hours discussing it with my in-laws, trying to negotiate a solution, but it was futile. Eventually, we had no choice but to give in. "Fine, we'll move out this week," I conceded, though it was a tough pill to swallow. Trying to keep things light, I told my in-laws, "We've learned a lot about family from you. It's time to put that wisdom into practice, right, Scott?" Scott responded with a chuckle. "Yeah, just like Betty said, we're happy to do it." Case closed. With that, Scott and I turned our backs on our chuckling in-laws and began preparing to move out of the guest house. Within 3 weeks, we had movers lined up and relocated without a moment to spare. Due to our tight schedule, we opted for the full packing service. We timed our move during my in-laws' regular lunch at karaoke with their friends to avoid any disputes over the belongings we were taking. We wrapped up all the formalities in 4 days by utilizing our paid leaves and began our new life. However, one day at work, I received a call from the front desk saying that someone claiming to be family was there to see me. I had a feeling my mother-in-law would show up soon, but I hadn't expected her to storm in on me at work. Instead of approaching Scott, I quickly texted him about the unexpected visit, bracing myself for the potential hassle. Scott responded immediately, advising that we politely request Emma to schedule a formal meeting to keep things professional and avoid any disturbances at my office. After relaying the message to the front desk, we managed to have our in-laws agree to leave without further incident. That evening, as Scott and I drove into the parking lot of our former residence where his parents lived, we were met with an unexpected reception. His parents, along with Walter and Judy, hurried out to greet us. To my surprise, both in-laws had one of Walter's twins strapped to their backs. As I locked the car, Walter confronted us aggressively, accusing us of driving up in his parents' cars. Scott remained calm and replied, "Your parents' cars? Which ones are those?" This only seemed to infuriate Walter further. "The cars you both drove up in, obviously," he snapped. "Well, Walter, both these cars were bought by us. Our names are on the registration certificates. Would you like to see them?" Scott offered, stepping forward. Frustrated by how our parents acted as if they owned everything, I chimed in, "We overlooked it when we all lived together, but now there's no need to lend them out. Don't forget your dad has that old minivan he used for work." Judy added, eyeing us sharply, "Who cares about that old car?" Walter retorted dismissively, but I countered, "It's perfect for the twins, isn't it? You can fit 2 car seats." I tried to inject some reason into the conversation. Our exchange seemed to make our in-laws uncomfortable, especially as Walter was chastised about the car ownership. They then shifted the topic to the furniture and appliances, accusing us of stealing them by taking them while they were away. That's stealing, not just from the main house, but also from the guest house, Walter argued. "Yes, and Walter and I can't live without those." Judy supported his claim. "Look, I get what you're saying. We're using the guest house anyway, but there's no reason to dip into the main house too," Scott reasoned. "Why isn't that stuff we all pitched in for?" I inquired, trying to understand their perspective. "Such arrogance. Once you gave it, it's ours," my father-in-law asserted. "Hold on. We never gave you anything. We just lent it. There's no record of us saying we're giving it to you, and there's no transfer of ownership on paper," Scott clarified, catching both in-laws off guard. While we were living together, lending things out was just a matter of convenience. But now that we're in separate homes, it doesn't make sense to keep sharing everything, Scott explained, exchanging smiles with me. "We have our own washing machines and fridges. You don't need duplicates, do you?" They argued, but Scott and I stood our ground, asserting that our lives were separate now and that we had the right to our belongings. The tension between us and the in-laws was palpable, but we knew we had made the right decision to move out and establish our own space. As we considered moving everything into our new, smaller place, Scott and I quickly realized the space would just be too cramped. It would make things even tighter, Scott concluded. We exchanged knowing grins, both fully aware of how tightly packed our current living situation already was. "I mean, we're already pretty squeezing as it is," I admitted, acknowledging the obvious. "Absolutely, it's a tight fit," Scott agreed. Just as Judy began to respond, we interjected. "Remember, it's a storage room." I reminded everyone with a chuckle. "It's supposed to be cramped." "Exactly," Scott added. "Until the official lease is signed, this is just how it has to be." Our casual conversation left Walter and our in-laws looking utterly confused. Then, Scott dropped some unexpected news. "Oh, by the way, we're moving to Philadelphia next month," he said, as if it was no big deal. Scott went on to explain that we had initially been offered positions at our company's headquarters, but we had turned them down because of our living situation. Now that we were free of that complication, we had accepted the transfers and received internal notifications about our new roles at the headquarters. "Even better," he added with a smile. "If all goes well, we might end up working there until retirement." As it turned out, a colleague of Scott's, who was going overseas for an extended period, had a high-rise condo in Philadelphia that he wanted to sell, and everything fell into place quickly. You guys are going to live in a high-rise condo in Philadelphia? Man, life sure does throw some curveballs, Walter remarked, clearly surprised by the sudden turn of events. Totally. If you and the gang hadn't pushed us to move out, we never would have stumbled upon this opportunity. I replied, grateful for the unexpected twist. But how could you even afford a high-rise condo? That seems unreal, Judy questioned, still trying to wrap her head around it. That's thanks to Betty's dad, Scott revealed. He provided the down payment. Betty's dad just gave you the down payment? Judy asked, visibly surprised. Yes, I explained. My sister is inheriting the family property, so he decided to help us out. It really turned our situation around. This arrangement is sort of a trade-off, Scott continued. The previous owner requested that we keep his modern altar until he returns to the country. I proposed lowering the asking price in exchange, and he agreed, giving us a significant discount. However, upon hearing about the substantial discount, Judy, who had been listening nearby, burst into tears. That's so unfair. I'd rather have a high-rise condo in Philadelphia than live in Nashville, she exclaimed, clearly upset. Suddenly, the in-laws, who had been silent until now, switched their tone and started praising Scott. Well, it looks like Scott really has it together, doesn't he? They said. Like mother, like son. Scott is following in my footsteps, they chimed in, trying to take credit for his success. Ignoring their comments, Scott turned to me and said, living in a high-rise in Philadelphia. Everyone's going to be so jealous. When are you moving? We must visit. If we're going to Philadelphia, you should come too, I suggested, trying to lighten the mood. The idea seemed to intrigue them, but the mood shifted abruptly when Walter and Judy, who had been arguing, turned to confront the in-laws. What are you talking about? Walter's being downsized, so you're going to have to support us. Plus, until I find another job, Judy will have to go back to work early from her parental leave. You'll have to take care of the household chores and the twins, they demanded, their frustration evident. As tension mounted, Walter and Judy marched up to the in-laws, who were holding the twins. The babies, sensing the tension, started crying, waking up the entire neighborhood. Noticing neighbors gathering at a distance from the garage, the in-laws turned beet red. Finally, Scott intervened, addressing Walter and the others. Stop just standing there, he said with a laugh. This is like a battle of wits between a raccoon and a fox. Turning to the bewildered faces around him, Scott grinned and explained, if both couples, us and you, don't work, our family finances will collapse next month. Fuming, Judy asked what this meant. I chimed in. Judy, you thought if Walter lost his job, it would be just an inconvenience, but it's much more than that. Without both couples contributing, everything falls apart. This revelation hung in the air, a stark reminder of the precarious balance our family finances rested on. When you moved into the in-laws' rental property, you thought you could just transfer the utility bills and grocery costs onto them, right? Well, our income was sustaining this household, but you can't rely on that anymore. I explained, revealing a truth that seemed to puzzle them. Oh, and you'll also need to start contributing to the mortgage payments for the house renovations. It's in father-in-law's name, Scott added. Why is it in his name? I asked, catching the in-laws off guard. Scott took over. I initially wanted the loan in my name since I was paying for it, but Dad insisted it would be shameful not to have it in his. So we used this property as collateral. Up until now, we've been transferring money into Dad's account to cover the loan. Walter, you'll need to chip in starting next month. Of course, the in-laws and Walter were against this idea, but Scott firmly declined to continue making the payments. We're going to relinquish our claim on the inheritance, so Walter, as the one who will inherit, you'd better take good care of your parents in the family home. I told him firmly. But children are still obligated to take care of their parents, right? My mother-in-law insisted. Scott brushed off her comment. Well, Considering we've been covering your living expenses and loan payments for the past 4 years, it's time for a change. Over the years, the support and financial assistance we provided had, in my mind, offset any future caregiving responsibilities I might have had as their son. With this in mind, I said, "Let's go home, love." Scott, looking at me, nodded in agreement. "Goodbye, everyone," he added as we turned to leave, ready to embark on a new chapter of our lives, free from the financial burdens and expectations that had weighed us down for so long. I felt a sense of closure, believing that we might never cross paths with them again. "Take care," I said, bidding farewell one last time. The following day, Scott and I decided to sell off the furniture and appliances we had taken from the main house, along with 2 cars that were no longer necessary for our new lifestyle. When Judy texted, asking for these items, I simply replied with a curt "Why?" before blocking her number, signaling the end of that chapter in our lives. Due to the insufficient special leave granted for our job transfer, we had to use our remaining paid vacation days to finalize the move. Although purchasing a high-rise condo was our long-term plan, we opted to rent for the first 2 years, finding a place owned by my boss, who kindly offered it to us at a reasonable rate. As the weekend arrived, bringing a much-needed calm after the whirlwind of recent events, we sat together, gazing out at the city lights. Breaking the silence, I expressed my gratitude to Scott. "I know this has been a hassle, but thank you for sticking with me." I truly appreciated his patience throughout everything. Scott, ever playful, teased, "What's with the formal tone all of a sudden?" But then his expression turned more serious. When we first got married and discussed living together, I should have thought things through more carefully. Back then, I was just happy you chose me over Walter, who had always been the favorite since we were kids, he continued, reflecting on our past choices. As we reminisced, Scott acknowledged how we had mindlessly followed his parents' wishes until they abruptly told us to make room for Walter and his family due to company restructuring. It struck him how unfair it was for them to make such demands after being such a burden on us, both financially and otherwise. How could they say that after all we've done for them? Scott wondered aloud. We also discussed how my parents might have been worried about me, given the complexity of our intertwined family dynamics. We both sat there, contemplating the fresh start ahead of us, determined to make the most of this new beginning, far from the demands and expectations that had once confined us. Scott then shared that he had sent an apology email to my parents, expressing his regrets about the challenges we had faced. Their response was unexpectedly warm and forgiving. They assured us that if we were committed to making their daughter happy moving forward, they would forgive our past mistakes. This encouraging reply made it easier to discuss financial matters with them, and they even lent us the down payment for our new home without any complications. Scott made a heartfelt promise to me, vowing to do everything in his power to safeguard our life together, just the 2 of us and hopefully our future children, if we were fortunate enough to have any. However, on the other side, my in-laws were facing their own struggles. Despite dipping into their retirement funds, they could barely manage the loan payments for their home renovations. With Walter's job search yielding no results, they were now relying solely on Judy's income, which added immense stress, often leading to loud arguments that could be heard outside their home. A former colleague reached out to me, sharing rumors that my in-laws might be planning to leave town, as they had ceased all communication with Scott and me. In a desperate attempt to reconnect, they even tried contacting my parents, but my father had promptly changed his phone number. This small act was significant, reflecting his stance on setting boundaries, especially given how my in-laws had previously belittled my family and overlooked basic courtesies before our marriage. Now, with almost no way to reach us, it seemed that the way they had treated others was finally coming back to haunt them. It was a classic case of what goes around comes around, reminding me of the old saying, "You reap what you sow."